The crystal chandeliers sparkled above the ballroom, scattering light across the polished marble floor and the crowd of Boston's elite. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved silently, refilling glasses of champagne, while laughter echoed from clusters of people dressed in silk, diamonds, and self-importance. I stood near the edge of the room, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy blue dress, the nicest thing in my wardrobe, but still too modest for this crowd. The scent of my mother's perfume, the only luxury I allowed myself, clung faintly to my wrist. It was the kind of night that looked perfect from the outside and felt hollow from within. "Vivian, you actually came," my sister Laura said, brushing her cheek near mine in a ghost of a kiss. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she pulled back, her smile sharp as glass. "We weren't sure you'd show up. You're not exactly one for family gatherings." "Hello to you too," I replied. "Emily insisted I come. She says 80 is a milestone worth celebrating." My daughter Emily, ever the diplomat, touched my arm and smiled at her aunt. "It's a family night," she said softly. "Let's try to make it one." The room fell into a hush as my father, Richard Lane, took the stage. At 80, he was still an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, his posture rigid, his voice smooth with authority. The man had built a construction empire brick by brick, deal by deal, often at the expense of everyone around him, including sometimes his family. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "A man who reaches 80 gains perspective on what truly matters: legacy." That word hung in the air like a judgment. He gestured for David and Laura to join him. "These two have expanded the Lane legacy beyond my wildest dreams. They've proven their loyalty and vision, and so tonight I want to honor them." A murmur rippled through the audience. I felt my heart begin to tighten. "My estate," my father continued, "valued at roughly $40 million, will be divided equally between them." The applause that followed was polite, but every handclap struck like a blow. I stood still, face calm, until he turned his gaze toward me. "And then there's Vivian," he said, his voice dipping into something between amusement and disdain. "My eldest, the dreamer, the professor who chose poetry over profit." He raised his glass in mock salute. 63 years old and still chasing ideals that can't be cashed. The crowd laughed uneasy at first, then louder as my siblings joined in. I set my glass down, straightened my shoulders, and found my voice. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "You've outdone yourself." Without waiting for an answer, I walked out. The marble floor stretched endlessly beneath my sensible heels, and the air outside hit me like freedom. The night was crisp, cold, and silent except for the sound of my own breath. In the distance, the glow of the city lights flickered like the pulse of a life I had built far from this world of arrogance and inheritance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small, I felt done. The parking lot was nearly empty, quiet except for the hum of distant traffic and the rustle of autumn leaves across the pavement. I was searching for my car keys when a voice behind me said, "Professor Lane?" I turned. An elderly man stood a few feet away, his face partly hidden by the shadows and the glow of a nearby streetlight. There was something familiar about him, his posture, his calm presence. "My name is Cole Harrington," he said gently. "I was your mother's attorney, and her friend." The name struck a chord in my memory. Cole Harrington had visited our home when I was a child, back when my mother, Eleanor, still laughed easily. He had attended her funeral too, 30 years ago. "Mr. Harrington," I said slowly, "it's been a long time." He nodded, eyes glancing toward the mansion behind us. "I've been waiting for this night for 3 decades, though I hoped it would never come." From his coat pocket, he withdrew a thick envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in my mother's elegant handwriting. "She asked me to give you this if your father ever humiliated you publicly," he said quietly. Her words, not mine. She made me promise. I stared at the envelope. The paper felt cool, heavy, alive with the weight of unspoken truth. "Thank you," I whispered, unsure what else to say. "Read it tonight," he said, pressing a card into my hand, "and call me tomorrow." Back in the safety of my small house in Cambridge, I sat at the kitchen table beneath the soft glow of the lamp. I broke the wax seal carefully, as if touching the past might make it fade. The faint scent of my mother's perfume drifted from the paper. The first line stole my breath. "My dearest Vivian, if you are reading this, it means your father has done what I always feared he would try to take your dignity, along with your inheritance." My heart pounded as I read on. You were never meant to be powerless, Vivian. I have secured a separate holding company in your name, Nightingale Holdings. It owns 15% of Lane Enterprises. The shares came from my own inheritance, hidden from your father's control. The documents enclosed will prove it. I pressed my hand to my mouth. 15%. A fortune. A secret buried for 30 years. At the bottom of the letter, her handwriting curved softly. This is not revenge, my love. It is the truth, and the truth one day will set you free. The morning light crept through the blinds, soft and uncertain, as if afraid to touch the mess of papers that now covered my kitchen table. Bank statements, legal documents, and copies of stock certificates lay scattered like puzzle pieces of a life I never knew I owned. When the doorbell rang, I didn't have to wonder who it was. Emily stood there in her hospital scrubs, hair tied back, concern written across her face. Mom, I saw the videos, she said quietly. Grandpa had no right to do that. It's fine, I replied, my voice calm but flat. It's over. She glanced at the papers on the table. That doesn't look over. I hesitated, then handed her the letter. She read it silently, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to awe. Mom, she whispered, this makes you one of the major shareholders in Lane Enterprises. You have power now, real power. Maybe, I said softly, but I don't even know what to do with it. Before I could say more, my phone buzzed. It was Cole Harrington. You read it? He asked. Yes, I replied. Every word. There's more you should know, he said. The Boston Globe is preparing an expose on government contracts tied to your father's company. Bribery, inflated bids, shell accounts, serious charges. It could destroy everything. I sank into the chair. And what does that have to do with me? Nightingale Holdings, your holding company, has veto power over the company's crisis strategy. They'll need your approval to make any move, which means whether you like it or not, you're about to walk into a war. I hung up and sat in silence. For decades, I had been the daughter who walked away, the one who chose integrity over ambition, books over boardrooms. My father had mocked me for it, but now that quiet choice might be the very thing that saved me. Emily poured coffee and set it in front of me. Mom, she said, her tone steady, you don't have to go to war, but you can choose to do what's right. Maybe this is your chance. Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I stood before the mirror, my reflection framed by shadows. My mother's eyes stared back at me through my own calm, knowing, unafraid. I whispered into the stillness, maybe it's time, Mom. Maybe this is what you were waiting for. The woman who looked back didn't seem small anymore. She looked ready. The next morning, the sky over Boston was the color of steel. I dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal gray suit that had been waiting in the back of my closet for years. It fit better than I expected. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the professor who lectured about literature and ethics. I saw someone my father might finally recognize an equal. The lobby of Lane Enterprises was a cathedral of glass and power. Men in tailored suits moved with purpose, their voices low and confident. The receptionist's polite smile faltered when she read my name, Mrs. Lane. Professor Lane, I corrected gently. I'm here for the board meeting. The executive elevator carried me upward in silence. My reflection in the mirrored walls stared back, calm but resolute. When the doors opened onto the 45th floor, I could already hear my father's voice booming from the conference room. And we'll deny every accusation until we see what they actually have, he was saying. The words were clipped, practiced, familiar. I opened the heavy doors. 14 heads turned. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Vivian, my brother David said, as if saying my name out loud might make me disappear. Good morning, I said. Please continue. My father's jaw tightened. What do you think you're doing? Attending a board meeting, I replied, taking an empty seat. After all, I'm a major shareholder now. The room buzzed with confusion. Their lawyer, Diane Sullivan, frowned and glanced at the papers in front of her. Professor Lane, this is a confidential meeting. So I've been told, I interrupted, but as the beneficial owner of Nightingale Holdings, which controls 15% of Lane Enterprises, I believe I have every right to be here. Diane's eyes widened as she skimmed the documents I slid across the table. She turned pale. Mr. Lane, she said carefully, these appear to be legitimate. Nightingale Holdings is indeed a registered stakeholder. For the first time in my life, I saw something in my father's expression I had never seen before. Fear. This is ridiculous, David snapped. You've been a professor your whole life. What do you know about corporate law, about strategy? I know about consequences, I said evenly, and integrity, two subjects this company could use a refresher on. Diane cleared her throat. The issue before us, she said, is how to respond to the impending Globe investigation. The allegations include bribery and manipulation of city contracts. We need a defense strategy that protects the company. My father leaned forward. We deny everything, shift the blame to middle management, and move assets offshore if necessary. That's not a defense, I said quietly. That's a cover-up. The room froze. My father glared at me. This isn't your world, Vivian. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly, I replied. Thousands of employees. Their pensions. Their families. You built this empire on my mother's money and other people's trust. Now it's crumbling under your greed. He slammed his hand on the table. Watch your tone. I'd been watching my tone for 63 years, I said. I think we've both had enough of that. Diane looked between us. Mr. Lane, legally, any crisis plan requires a supermajority vote. That means Nightingale's approval, Professor Lane's approval. The silence that followed was electric. My father's face drained of color. Hello, Dad, I said softly. I believe we need to talk about the future of your company. He didn't answer. He just sat back in his chair, breathing hard, his eyes locked on me as if seeing me for the very first time. By the next morning, the story had broken. The Boston Globe headline sprawled across the front page, Lane Enterprises under federal investigation for bribery and fraud. My phone began buzzing before dawn, reporters, colleagues, even former students wanting to know if it was true. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I turned on the television. Outside the Lane Tower downtown, news vans crowded the sidewalks, their satellite dishes aimed toward the sky. A reporter stood before the building, speaking solemnly about corruption, contracts, and betrayal. The words criminal investigation scrolled in red across the bottom of the screen. A part of me wanted to turn it off. But I didn't. I needed to see what truth looked like when it finally came into the light. By 9 o'clock, I was back in the same conference room, the air thick with tension. Richard sat at the head of the table, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. Diane Sullivan shuffled through papers, her voice steady but grim. The evidence is extensive, she said. Emails, invoices, whistleblower statements. It's no longer a question of if they'll publish, it's a matter of what happens after. David was pacing, his tie loosened, his composure cracking. We can't just confess. Do you know what this will do to us? Laura looked pale, almost fragile beneath her makeup. We'll be ruined. All of us. I spoke quietly. Then maybe it's time to stop pretending we weren't already. My father glared at me. You think you can fix this with your idealism? With your lectures about ethics? I met his eyes. No, I think I can fix it by telling the truth. The room fell silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. I stood, my voice calm but carrying through the room. We will issue a public statement. We'll acknowledge wrongdoing, cooperate with investigators, and protect our employees. No scapegoats, no lies. You'll destroy us, my father said. Maybe, I replied. But you destroyed something far more valuable a long time ago. That afternoon, I faced the cameras outside the Lane Tower. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. Lane Enterprises has failed to uphold the standards our community deserves, I began. But failure can become the first step toward redemption. As the reporters shouted questions, I felt the wind rise, carrying the echo of my mother's words. This wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. 3 months later, Boston had settled into its long gray spring. The headlines had faded, replaced by newer scandals, fresher names. But inside Lane Enterprises, the work of rebuilding had only just begun. The board had approved what the press called the Lane Restoration Plan. It was more than damage control, it was transformation. We sold off questionable assets, brought in independent auditors, and created an ethics committee with real authority. Employees who once feared for their jobs now walked the halls with cautious optimism. David surprised me most. The man who had once laughed at my lectures on integrity now spent long nights in his office, poring over contracts, uncovering irregularities that had gone unnoticed for years. He no longer spoke in profits and margins but in lessons and consequences. You were right, Vivian, he said one evening. His voice rough exhaustion. Fear keeps you quiet, guilt keeps you small. I'm tired of both. Laura came next. I found her one afternoon sitting in the break room surrounded by junior staff, sleeves rolled up, helping them organize a community outreach program. When she looked up, her eyes were softer than I'd ever seen them. "You told me once I live in a bubble," she said. I think it finally popped. And then there was my father. Richard Lane, once the man who never apologized, now sat in the shadows of the empire he'd built. He was no longer the voice of authority in boardrooms, only a quiet presence in the corner of my office some mornings, offering advice I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. "You're running the company with compassion," he told me one day, his tone oddly thoughtful. "It's inefficient but effective." He paused. "Your mother would have liked that." His words caught me off guard, cutting deeper than any insult ever had. "Maybe," I said softly. "She believed truth could heal things money never could." He nodded slowly, staring at the window. Maybe she was right. The following week, I visited the construction site at the old harborfront project, the one that had almost brought us down. The sea air was cool, the cranes towering against the skyline. For the first time in years, I saw it not as a monument to greed, but as a chance for renewal. We were rebuilding it under a new name, the Eleanor Lane Foundation, a space that would house a public library, a small museum, and a community center. The same ground where corruption had thrived would now be dedicated to knowledge and inclusion. Standing there, I felt a quiet peace I hadn't known in decades. The sound of hammers and saws rose around me, steady and rhythmic, a heartbeat. That night, I reread my mother's letter for what must have been the 100th time. Near the bottom, in faded ink, she had written, "Truth is the only wealth that grows when shared." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle deep within me. For the first time, I understood what she meant. The legacy my father had worshipped was built of steel and glass, but the one she left me was invisible, woven from honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. And for the first time, I felt worthy of it. 5 years passed, quietly and quickly, the way time moves when peace replaces chaos. Boston's skyline shimmered under the afternoon sun, and where the harbor front once stood as a monument to scandal, the Eleanor Lane Community Library now rose in its place, glass walls filled with light, laughter, and stories. Inside, children ran between bookshelves, retirees read newspapers by the window, and students studied in corners where the ocean breeze slipped through open doors. The city had embraced it. People no longer spoke of the old corruption. They spoke of renewal. David now lectured part-time at Northeastern University, teaching a course called Business Ethics in the Real World. Laura had moved downtown to manage the foundation's outreach programs, spending weekends organizing literacy drives. They were no longer the polished heirs of a dynasty, they were people who had finally learned to stand on their own. As for my father, Richard Lane, he came to the library every Thursday afternoon. His steps were slower now, his cane tapping softly across the marble floor. The staff knew him by name, though few recognized who he once was. He always brought fresh flowers for the photo of my mother that hung in the lobby. At the library's 5th anniversary celebration, he turned to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother would be proud, Vivian." I smiled. Maybe she always knew I'd finish what she started. He nodded, eyes glistening. "You didn't just rebuild the company, you rebuilt us." For once, I didn't correct him. He was right. Later that evening, after the celebration ended and the laughter faded into the night, I walked alone through the quiet halls of the library. The building glowed softly under the dim lights, the air filled with the faint scent of paper and polished wood. I stopped before the glass display at the entrance, a small exhibit chronicling the Lane family's transformation. Inside the case, next to the company's original incorporation documents, lay my mother's letter, preserved behind protective glass. Her handwriting, elegant and deliberate, seemed to glow in the light. Beside it sat something new, a copy of my book, The Quiet Rebellion, How Truth Rebuilt an Empire. It wasn't about revenge or power. It was about legacy, the kind built not from dominance but from integrity. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, older now but steadier. Behind me I could see my father's cane leaning near the door, forgotten again, and I smiled. Some habits die hard. I thought of everything we had survived, the public disgrace, the endless scrutiny, the long nights when I'd questioned whether the truth was worth the cost. And now, standing there, I knew it always had been. My mother's words echoed in my mind, "Truth, my darling, is the ultimate legacy." I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The harbor stretched wide and calm under the stars, the water reflecting the city's lights like fragments of memory. As the cool wind brushed against my face, I realized that the story wasn't about corruption, redemption, or even family. It was about courage. The courage to stand when it would be easier to stay silent. I took a deep breath, whispering softly, "Thank you, Mom." Behind me, the sign above the door caught the moonlight, "The Eleanor Lane Foundation, where truth begins again." And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.